And I also have the distinct honor of being able to introduce our presenter today, Josefina Bittar. She's a PhD candidate in the Department of Linguistics at the University of New Mexico. After completing her bachelor's degree in Spanish from the Universidad Nacional de Asunción in Paraguay, she was awarded a Fulbright scholarship that allowed her to travel to the United States to obtain a master's degree in linguistics, which she also earned at the University of New Mexico. Being born and raised in a highly bilingual country such as Paraguay sparked Josefina's interest in bilingualism and mutual influences between languages. Currently, she's working on her dissertation, which focuses on the syntactic influences of Spanish into Paraguayan Guarani, the two official languages of her home country. She's also taught linguistic courses at the University of New Mexico and the Universidad Nacional de Asunción. She served as president of the Linguistics Graduate Student Organization for 2 years and is a second-year LAII PhD fellowship and was recently honored with a teaching award by the university. Please join me in welcoming Josefina.
Hi, everyone. I see some familiar faces. Thank you for being here or there. All right, so I'll go ahead and start. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for inviting me. I think the timing is great. I've been thinking a lot about my research lately and why I do the things I do. So this talk is helped me with that. Like preparing this talk helped me, think about my research. Okay, let's see. I have to share my screen. I practice this. Okay, this is where let's see, nope, that's not what I want. One second. Okay. Okay, this is what I want. There you go. And you can all see my screen now. There's a picture and the title of my talk.
Not yet.
You can't see it? Oh, okay. There you can see it, right?
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, so my talk is about my research on Paraguayan Guarani, which is a minoritized language of the majority. And I called, this is the title of my talk because, as you are going to see, and some of you know because you've lived in Paraguay, Guarani is actually the language that's spoken by the majority of the population. And yet it doesn't have the prestige that Spanish does. So, okay, so in this presentation, I will talk about Paraguay first, then I'll talk a little bit about linguistics, because it's one of those fields that it's not very well known, I guess, compared to other fields in the humanities and social sciences. And then I'll talk about my linguistic research in Paraguay. So I'll start with Paraguay. So Paraguay is a country in the middle of South America. It's where I'm from, and it's actually where I am right now. It has a population of about, can you see this? Why is it there? No. Hopefully it will go away. Okay, so it has a population of 7 million people, more or less. And these are the languages that are spoken. So almost 30% of the population is monolingual in Guarani. Of course, this is almost 20 years ago, but this is the last census that was, I'm just trying to find a very polite way of saying this, but let's say that the 2012 census didn't work well. So this is the last updated data we have And then 10% of the population is monolingual in Spanish, and then more than 53% of the population speaks both languages. Of course, we also have to be very careful when we deal with census data because of how these questions are asked. And sometimes people answer what they think the interviewer wants to hear as well. So there are some people, some researchers that say that there are no monolingual Guarani speakers anymore, because even though people might not be able to speak Spanish, they will still understand it because Spanish is everywhere. It's on the media. Of course, in school, people are taught Spanish and in Spanish. So, okay, and there we have the flag. Okay, so this is what Paraguayan Guarani looks like in its written form. It belongs to the Tupi Guarani language. It's a large language family in South America. What's interesting, well, one of the things that is interesting about Paraguayan Guarani is that its speakers are not, do not identify as indigenous, and they live in rural areas and urban areas, so basically all over the country. Sometimes people say, oh, Guarani is spoken in rural areas and it's not really spoken in the city, and that's not true. I've been living in Asunción, the capital of Paraguay, my whole life, and you hear it everywhere. Like I hear my neighbors speak Guarani all the time, and well, I don't go out much lately, but it's everywhere. It was made an official language since the new constitution of 1992. So Paraguay had a long dictatorship of 35 years. And in 1989, after the dictatorship, there was a new constitution project. And in 1992, Guarani was made co-official along with Spanish with the new constitution. What that meant was that in education, everyone had to be taught Guarani and Spanish. So currently, since 1994, with the educational reform, everyone has to learn Guarani in schools. It is used as a language of instruction, but not in many schools. In most schools, it's taught as a second language, which is strange because most people speak it as a first language. So I'll talk about that in a minute. So I said at the beginning that Guarani doesn't have the prestige that Spanish does. So because it's not the language for social mobility, if you want to go to the university, for example, get a degree at the university, you would have to speak Spanish. If you want to get, let's say, a management job or something like that, you would have to speak Spanish. And also to enter the university, there's an admissions or entrance exam, and for most departments, you would have to take a Spanish exam, not a Guarani exam, not that I know of, at least. And it has covert prestige because it's a language that shows solidarity and that you belong. It shows that you're Paraguayan, and it's a language you would speak to your friends and things like that. But it's surrounded by purist ideologies, and I'm going to talk more about it in a minute. So purist or purism is an ideology, or it's a set group of ideas that say that the influence of one language to another language is bad. So a language has to be pure, that is, it shouldn't have influence from other languages. And of course that we know that that is impossible because all languages influence each other, and most of the world's populations speak more than one language. So there's a lot of influence across languages all over the world. But still, some people would say that you shouldn't, in the case of Guarani, that you shouldn't let Spanish influence the lexicon or the syntax of Guarani. Okay. Guarani is everywhere, as I said. So for example, I'm going to show you some products. These are all Paraguayan products. And back in the day, I interviewed some people that were in advertisement, and they said that if you want to show that your product is Paraguayan, like if you really want to exploit that, let's say that attracts more consumers, then you would definitely use a name in Guarani. So you have Curupi is, it's a word in Guarani, it's the name of a mythical creature. Morantin means white. This is soap, detergent for clothes. Of course, beer. This was very popular. It's not the name of the beer. Tuixala diferencia is a very big difference. This was very popular when I was, I'm gonna say a child or a teenager. It was a very popular ad. And then there's alfajores, which are, oh, it's funny, like, I don't know how to say that in English. Biscuits, like little treats. They're very good. Tatacua, which means like hornos. Like you have those in New Mexico, right? And you call them hornos or hornos. I don't know. So it's basically that. So it's everywhere. And if you, as I said, if you want to show you're Paraguayan, your product is Paraguayan, and you're proud of it, you usually use Guarani. It has a very powerful, it's a very powerful symbol to show you belong, you're Paraguayan, and you're proud of it. Which is why a lot of politicians use Guarani as well. So this is the one to the left is the current president, and his campaign, his political movement was Colorado, which is the name of the party, Añetete, which means the true, like the true Colorado. And that was his, I think his movement still call that. And this was his rival. And it was very interesting. When was he elected? He was elected 2 years ago, and his this was his first opponent in the primaries, and he didn't speak Guarani. So there was this whole debate about, like, how can he be president of Paraguay if he doesn't speak Guarani? And that was a big part of the current president's campaign. But to be honest, I never heard him speak Guarani. I don't know, maybe he says he can speak it, but I don't know. I haven't heard him speak. And but people attacked him a lot because he didn't speak Guarani, and he didn't deserve the presidency because he couldn't speak the language. And of course, then in the general election, this was the opponent. And as you can see, he also used Guarani in his slogan. So it's something that I think most politicians or political ads would do. They would have slogans in Guarani to show that they're true Paraguayans and they love their country. And yeah. So with the basically, well, it says the same thing, right? With you, the change is possible. Again, with you, we can, or it is possible, right? Anyway, so for the educational system, as I said, in 1994, since 1994, Guarani is taught in every school and all over the country, mostly as a second language. It is used as a language of instruction in some schools. But there was this debate about what Guarani we're going to teach. So yes, we're going to teach Guarani, but what kind? This researcher said that there was an agreement that the Guarani variety that was going to be taught had to exclude anything that resembles Spanish. So, for example, all the lexical loans or the words that were borrowed from Spanish, they were replaced for native origin words because they had to teach academic Guarani, whatever people spoke that that wasn't true Guarani, and then what's the purpose of being taught, and what's the purpose of teaching that kind of language, let's say. And I've been listening to some radio shows lately, and some people that support this view. There's a lot of this view that you shouldn't teach Guarani that is influenced by Spanish. They say that people say, because people have been complaining about this, people have said, like, why do you teach this Guarani that nobody speaks? People are not going to learn, and then they're going to learn something that is completely useless. And then their argument is, well, we have to teach people to speak correctly. So this is a Spanish speakers go to school, and they go to school to learn proper Spanish. So we do the same with Guarani. Guarani is whatever they speak at home is in proper Spanish, and they go to school so they learn proper Guarani. So that's sort of their argument. This is about the education reform of 1994, which is still in place. This is the same. It's the same system. It has changed a little bit, but it's pretty much the same curriculum. Okay, and then the whole Dopara debate start. Well, Dopara is a word that has been used for a while now, but I think it's very relevant to, it has been more relevant since Guarani has been implemented in schools and has become an official language. So Dopara basically means mixture. There's a traditional dish that's called Dopara. So it means mixture. And when people talk about Dopara, they mean, oh, it's a mixture of Spanish and Guarani. Mostly what people mean is when people code switch. So for example, you know, you're speaking Spanish and then you switch to Guarani, like that. But also people use it to refer to Guarani that has a lot of influence from Spanish, basically words that come from Spanish. So for example, if your variety of Guarani includes a lot of loans from Spanish, then sometimes people refer to that variety as Dopara. I haven't really heard people say that Dopara is, for example, Spanish speakers who use a lot of loans from Guarani. It's more about it's Guarani with a lot of influence from Spanish. So of course, and why do I call it a debate? Because people really, I mean, in academia, people want to know what that is. We're like, what is Dopara? They want to define it. It's a little bit like Spanglish. So I think this is a very ubiquitous conversation in New Mexico, right? People talk about Spanglish all the time. I've taught Spanish courses at UNM, or linguistics courses at UNM, and this Spanglish topic is there, and there are a lot of feelings about the term and so on. So it's similar in that thing, in a sense. So this here, it's an infographic, or I don't know, graph, right before the elections. So a lot of interesting things happen during election times. You probably know that. So this Ewatana Calcula means, literally it means walk and do the math, or walk and calculate. So you can probably recognize the loan calcular there from Spanish. It's a very common phrase. People say it all the time to me. Just stop and think about it for a moment. And then it's funny how people react to this kind of. So this person here, for example, said, so they were like, "El calcular, what on earth is that?" Right? And then this person answered, Dopara. So remember, it's a Guarani, but it has loans from Spanish. And then this person said, Dopara is disgusting, Guarani is beautiful. So what I usually argue is that Guarani, since it's become an official language, it's a very strong symbol of identity, Paraguayan identity. So you can't really say, I mean, quote unquote, you can't say it looks very bad if you say you shouldn't speak Guarani, Guarani shouldn't be used, Guarani is awful, whatever. But those same attitudes, those negative attitudes towards Guarani that existed in the past, now transferred to Dopara, this variety that has many loans from Spanish. However, there are people that want to sort of rescue the term Dopara and see it as a beautiful thing, whether it's a mixture of Spanish and Guarani. That's basically who we are as Paraguayans. So I'm going to show you this ad. It's yerba mate, so the traditional drink, and it sort of shows what people have in mind when they hear Dopara or when they use that term. So you're probably not going to hear what they say, but it doesn't matter. But in the radio, she hears Spanish and Guarani at the same time. So there's interference in the radio. And so she's hearing two voices at the same time. One of them speaks Spanish, the other one speaks Guarani.
Nuestra tradición es mezclar y hacer algo único. Por eso juntamos moringa con hierbas naturales para una mezcla maestra, muy nuestra y que te hace bien. Yerba mate campesino, nuestra forma de hacer las cosas.
So basically, what they say is, our tradition is to mix two things that are different and create something unique. So it's like we have to be proud of it. Yerba mate. So, and when it comes to academia, there's been a debate on, okay, is it what do people speak? Is it Guarani or Dopara? And where do you draw the line? How do you know? How do you tell if it's Guarani or if it's Dopara? And who speaks which variety? Or maybe are there people that can speak both? So that's what got me interested in linguistics, and I really wanted to do research on this topic. And that's when linguistics came to my life. And one of the big questions in linguistics is, how do languages influence each other? And of course, this is a very complex question. And I'm going to, okay, so this is one an academic wrote about the difference between Guarani and Dopara when I started sort of reading about the topic. She said that Guarani, the difference between Guarani and Dopara is that Dopara has a lot of loans from Spanish, like I said before. And she gives examples. So she gives an example of a verb, o escribí, which would be the third person right. Would be the Dopara version of the sentence, and this would be the Guarani version of the sentence. So basically the difference between Guarani and Dopara is in the lexicon. If there is a term for it in the native, a native origin form in Guarani, and you don't use it, you use the loan, the Spanish loan instead, then what you're speaking is Dopara, it's not Guarani. And this, people have, for example, said, this is the same author, she said that there isn't a normalization or systematization that defines linguistic variety, present-day Guarani, or Dopara. It is fundamentally individual. It's influenced by communicative situation, the type of addressee, and the subject being discussed. So basically, Dopara is just a random mixture of the two languages, and we can't really study it. And this is another author who said, we see Dopara, which is again present-day Guarani, as a way of speaking with two codes at the same time. Guarani is relegated almost exclusively to textbooks, manuals, and poems. And I find these quotes and these statements problematic because what you're saying to the speakers is, whatever you speak that is not Guarani, Guarani is what you read in the grammars that were written 500 years ago, and it's usually used in poems or formal settings, but what is spoken now, that cannot be considered Guarani. That has to be something else. So, and they call it Dopara. So my research, you can, of course, study the influence of one language into another language in different levels. So you can study, for example, the influence in phonetics and phonology. You can look at morphosyntax, you can look at semantics, pragmatics, and different levels of linguistic structure. And you can also look at languages and society, the connection between language and culture, language development, language in the mind, the brain. Of course, language and education is a huge subfield of linguistics. There's computational linguistics as well. And we have many theories to approach these questions and topics. Of course, you can study languages through time. You can also compare different languages. You can document the languages, and you can also try to revitalize languages that are endangered. And the data that we use can come from different sources. You can have corpus or corpora, which are large databases of spoken or written language or signed language. You can run experiments, you can observe people's behavior, you can have surveys or language references, you can look at grammars, you can look at dictionaries, and so on. And the analysis, of course, can be qualitative and quantitative. So what I do is I look at morphosyntax, I look at the influence in the morphosyntactic level of Guarani. I look at language and society, so I look at speakers from different ages, genders, location. I use a functional theory, and I use corpus, which I'm going to let you know what that is in a minute, what my corpus looks like. And I look at languages through time. And the way I do this, I look at how older people speak compared to younger speakers. So that can give you a sense of how the language has changed over time. And I do both qualitative and quantitative analyses. I think numbers are very convincing sometimes. So I usually add numbers to my analyses. Okay, and of course this is the subfield language contact, that would be my subfield. As I said, I look at loan verbs in Paraguayan Guarani, and I use construction grammar as a theory or usage-based. Basically, we look at how people actually speak. So we pay a lot of attention to natural speech. Again, I use different demographics. I look at people that have different backgrounds. My corpus has 40 social linguistic interviews, which I'll talk about in a minute. And I basically do probabilities when it comes to quantitative analysis. Okay, so as I said, I look at borrowing. So borrowing is a change that results from language contact. And languages can borrow pretty much anything from another language. Most of the time we talk about lexical borrowing, which is the borrowing of words. So we talk about loans when we talk about language borrowing. And there's also talk about grammatical borrowing. So, and this is a little bit harder to prove, not a little bit, a lot harder to prove, because sometimes what languages do is they don't borrow the form. What they do is they borrow the function. So for example, they borrow the future tense, but not the word, let's say, or I'm gonna show you an example in a minute. Okay, so when words are borrowed, which is what I looked at the beginning of my career, is you can have a cultural loan. So this is a word that didn't exist in the language that was incorporated, was inserted into the recipient language. And then there are core borrowings, which are words that already existed. There were terms for that concept in the language, but a new word was borrowed, maybe because of the prestige of the donor language. So the effect here refers to what happens when you have a term for a concept. You already have, your language has a term for this concept. And then there's another, you borrow a new word from another language. What is going to happen to the quote unquote native word or the old word? Is it going to be replaced, or are these two going to coexist? So this is the question that I wanted to answer, because as I said, there's a lot of talk about Dopara sort of ruining Guarani. So speakers are borrowing new words and they're replacing the older forms. And I wanted to see how that happened, or actually if that was true at all. So I wanted to see if these Spanish loans were replacing the Guarani forms, or if there was some sort of coexistence. So what kind of data do I use? I use natural speech because that's where the fun things happen. So all the changes, this is the basis of the functional usage-based approach. All the changes that occur in a language occur in natural speech. So when we're speaking our vernacular casual style. So I collected 40 interviews. All of these interviews are 1 hour long, because this is, if you interview a person for an hour, it is very likely that at some point in the interview, they're going to show you their casual style. Because at the beginning, people are, might use a more formal way of speaking, especially if they don't know you. But then when they start talking about their childhood, or they're talking about soccer, they're talking about things they like, they will use their natural way of speaking. And I have women and men. The youngest speakers are 18-year-olds, and the oldest speaker is 85. And I collected these interviews in rural areas of the country and also urban areas of the country. So this is the urban location. I collected these interviews 5 years ago, almost 5 years ago. I was granted a field research grant by LAII, and which allowed me to travel to Paraguay, to Asunción, the capital. And so this is the neighborhood where I collected most of the interviews. This is, I should probably mention this. I'm not from this neighborhood. So I asked a friend who is from the neighborhood if we could go and talk to people, because I can't just go and knock on people's door and say, hey, would you like to talk to me for an hour, because I have a thesis to write. So I went with him, and that also what it does is, if you have a person that's from the place and the person knows the participant, then they will use their casual speech because they're talking to someone that they know. Even I'm there, but they're talking to someone that they know, so they won't use a formal register. And this is the school. This is where I took this photo. This is a school where where we recorded most of the interviews. Okay, this is Asunción. And rural location. This was, I finished collecting these interviews not very long ago. I went to San Juan de Nepomuceno again with a friend who is from the place, and we basically interviewed his relatives because he has a lot of siblings. So I think a lot of siblings and aunts and uncles. So it's that was really fun getting to know all the family. And again, this urban versus rural dichotomy. San Juan de Nepomuceno is 200 miles from Asunción, more or less. It has an urban center, but it's mainly comprised of different different, they call them companies. What do they call? I know the word in English, but different communities. They have different communities that are in more rural areas. So actually, if you talk to someone from San Juan, from downtown San Juan, and you tell them that you're going to one of the communities or one of the compañías, they say, oh, you're going to the countryside. So that was very interesting, because for me, that was the countryside, but for them, it's not the countryside. The countryside, you have to go a little bit further, but that was interesting. Okay, so what do you do after you collect all this data? You have 40 hours of interviews, you have to transcribe them. And that is a lot of work. And a friend helped me with this, and I am incredibly grateful for his help. So basically you transcribe the interviews. You click here and it is connected to the sound file, which is nice. And then what you do is you transfer all this information to a spreadsheet. I use an Excel spreadsheet, and then you have, you code for the speaker, who was talking at the moment, their sex, their age, where their location, and then what they were saying. And I added some linguistic information here as well. So for 40 hours of speech, that is, that was a lot of coding that I had to do. So for this first study that I did for my master thesis, I found that there was very little overlap between the native origin form and the loans. So of all the verbs, because I was looking at verbs, of all the verbs that I transcribed, I found about 10 or 12 that somewhat overlapped. Then again, if you looked at each verb closely, then you see that they do not really overlap. They have different meanings. They are used in different, with different syntactic structures. So for example, I looked at no. So no, this is a Spanish loan from conocer. This is the native origin one. And these do not really overlap. Sometimes they do, but most of the times they don't. So this verb is used with one, this form is used with one meaning, this form is used and has a different meaning. The same with vivir from Spanish vivir, and co, which also means to live in Guarani and has other meanings as well. To be born, for example, there's this nacer from Spanish nacer and heñoy. I actually didn't see a lot of tokens or instances of heñoy because I think from the data, most people would use heñoy when they're talking about plant. When they're talking about human being, they use alone. So as you can see, there isn't an overlap because one is used for plants, the other one is used for human beings. And I argue that those two coexist because they have different meanings. So it's not, again, going back to this question of replacement versus coexistence, I think that these loans aren't really replacing the native origin forms because their meanings do not overlap. Okay. But of course, after all this, and this is not a new idea. Let's say there has been discussion in literature on how loans do not necessarily mean the same thing than their quote-unquote counterparts. For example, in Spanish in the US, you have this loan building from building and edificio. And I guess for a person that is not, does not speak US Spanish, you would consider those equal. But what the authors were arguing was that the speakers of US Spanish use building to refer to building, use building to refer to buildings in the US compared to, for example, buildings in San Juan, Puerto Rico, which were very different from the buildings that you see in New York. Same for Easter versus Pascua. So the author said that they used, the speakers used Easter when they were talking about the celebration in the US, which is very different from the celebration in any place in Latin America. Those are different types of celebration. So this idea that loans, native origin words do not really overlap is not new, but it's something that a lot of people think. Oh, you're using the loan because you don't know the word in your native language. Instead of paying more attention and saying, well, these might be different in meaning and in usage in general. So of course, after this, I had a lot more questions than answers, which I guess it's true for science in general, or grad school in general, you end up with a lot of questions. So I'm trying to answer my new questions now. That's where I'm at right now. So this sentence, I didn't complain about my children. This is the sentence in Guarani. It has the loan from Spanish quejar, quejarse. Which is, I didn't complain about my children. And of course, this comes from Spanish quejarse, no me quejaba de mis hijos. However, what my question was, and this is where my questions was, in that I was seeing that it was not only the verb that was being borrowed, but there seems to be some elements in the construction in the sentence that were replicating the Spanish counterpart. So for example, in Spanish, quejar, it's used with quejar with a, it's used in its pronominal form, quejarse, yo me quejo, tú te quejas, and so on. So it looked like this Guarani J was replicating this, this Spanish me, right? And again, this we here, it means from in Guarani, and it looks like it was replicating, or it is replicating Spanish de. So what I did was I created, or I thought of new studies, and I went back to this idea of borrowing. So again, we said borrowing is a change that results from language contact. And I decided that I was going to look at both the lexicon and the grammar at the same time, because it looked like both of those borrowings were happening together. So if I would focus only on the lexicon, then there were a lot of things that I wouldn't be able to explain. So my new study looks at this object marker, P. So P indicates basically an object marker. You're indicating that that thing in your sentence is an object. It's not the subject. So it's not doing the action. So for example, here, I don't want to leave my child. So you would add something here to indicate that your child is the object. You are the subject, your child is the object. The same here, right? Don't you punish your child. But as you can see, you don't have the marker P here, but you do have it here. So people have argued that this is a borrowing from Spanish. Because in Spanish, when you have human objects, human direct objects, you have to mark it, right? You have to say, it's not like English, you don't mark it. You say, I don't want to leave my jacket, I don't want to leave my child, then you don't add anything, quote unquote, add anything. But in Spanish, you do, right? You say, no quiero dejar a mi hijo. You have to, and it's obligatory. Same thing here. Punish your child, castigar a tu hijo, because tu hijo, your child, is, of course, human. So they say that Guarani replicated this pattern from Spanish. And this is why grammatical borrowing is a lot harder to prove than lexical borrowing, because these two don't really look the same. One is a, and the other one is pe. But what we're arguing is that the function is borrowed. What this a is doing here in Spanish, Guarani will do it with pe, based on the influence, replicating the Spanish structure. Okay, so again, I looked at all the interviews, 40 hours of speech. I extracted 613 instances of sentences that had human direct objects. And what I found was that they did occur more often when it was suffixed in alone. And the younger the speaker, the more often they would use this suffix. So for example, I have here, this is a sentence from the corpus, you raise your children well. So again, this is a native origin word, membu, which means child. And it doesn't have the marker. But a very similar sentence, which instead of having membu, the native origin word, it has a lone familia, which means child as well. There you can see the marker. So what I found was that whenever the speakers were using alone as the object, the marker would appear more often. And I also found that the younger the speaker, the more likely they use this P. So, right, so as you can see, this is my 85-year-old. He used the marker 50% of the times, but the younger the speakers, so for example, compared to this 18-year-old, she used it 80% of the time. So that's again one of the reasons why I look at different people of different demographic backgrounds, because if I didn't pay attention to age or sex or location, well, especially age in this case, then I would have missed all this information. This information is relevant, and it indicates that it is might be on its way of becoming obligatory in the language. Okay, so why is this important? So I believe that documentation of natural speech across generations is essential to reduce or to help eradicate the prejudice around different varieties of Guarani. So for example, by saying, well, young people use these loans not because they're ignorant, not because they don't know their native language, but because they want to convey a different meaning. Also, well, that's the change in perception of loans. If you tell people, you know, I have evidence that these two words are being used to convey different meanings, then they will be less likely to say they don't speak their language well, they're ruining the language. And of course, when we tell people that they're ruining their language, then they don't want to speak it. So I think it's very important that we document natural speech, we document how Guarani is actually spoken, so people can appreciate the systematicity, can appreciate all the things that speakers know when they speak their native language. And with my last study, this has to do more with the theory. I want to propose that we should look at borrowing from a lexical grammatical continuum. So we should look at both the lexicon, the vocabulary, and the grammar at the same time, because if not, we might be missing out on some very interesting things that are happening. Okay, so that's my presentation. I want to thank my advisor who is here today. I literally couldn't do this without her support, and Antonio Sam, my friend, who invited me to San Juan, and I met all his family, and they were very nice to me, to my friend Israel, who took me to his neighborhood in Asunción, and all the interviewees, who I cannot name them because they're anonymous, but they know who they are, so I thank them. And of course, the Latin American Institute, and because they have supported my research in different ways and several times, and also to the Department of Linguistics and Spanish and Portuguese, who have allowed me to teach and also fund my research that way, and to GPSA at UNM.